I hate painting, but sometimes it just has to be done. It's been a while since my last video, but I haven't given up on the shed, so hang about and I'll show you what's been happening. I thought long and hard about the sequence that the trim pieces would need to be screwed up before starting the job. Finally, I decided that starting at the top and working my way down would probably be best. My neighbour was nice enough to offer me a hand while he was on school holidays, which made the job a little easier. But climbing up and down a ladder all day tends to add a lot of time to the job. I used a pine scotia as a cornice on the angled walls, screwing into the roof battens. Next were the strips that cover the roof battens. That was fairly straightforward, just measuring between the cornice pieces and screwing them up. The most challenging part was holding the strip up in one hand and using the impact driver to put in a screw. I ended up putting a nail in the cornice to hold up the end of the batten strip, which made it a little easier to get it screwed up. Cutting the strips around the diagonal braces was another obstacle, but it was manageable. The smaller pieces actually made it easier to put them up. And it was the same deal with the garage ceiling. Firstly, putting up the cornices, which were cobbled together from the offcuts left over from the workshop ceiling. I temporarily put those strips up at the top of the end wall to help get the length of the cornice. I wasn't too worried about the appearance of the garage, so I thought I'd just join together all the offcuts from the batten strips as well. Usually I wouldn't do that, but it saved me having to buy more timber. In case you were wondering, I was using the same 30mm Tex screws here that were used to fasten the wall ply sheets. To trim the top of the back wall, firstly the corners needed a strip of square pine so that the length of the top piece could be obtained. But before that could be done, the cornices needed trimming with the multi-tool so that the corner strips would fit nicely. Which they did, and so cheapskate me could then join together some more offcuts to trim the top. In an attempt to pull these warped ply wall sheets straight, I first screwed some joining pieces in behind the ply sheets about 600mm up to help pull them together. Then I nailed up this 66x11mm strip at the horizontal join. I used the laser level to make sure they'd cover the join with enough space to put in a screw above and below the join line. While working on that wall, I cut some little strips to cover the joint where these braces attached to it. I just marked on the strip where it needed cutting and nailed each piece up as I went. The opposite wall needed a strip to neaten up where the wall sheets met the truss. I didn't cover the horizontal join in this wall's sheets since they were kept pretty straight by the timber frame. Also, I'm thinking about mounting some big shelf brackets on that wall so a strip would get in the way of them. Next job was to knock up some architraves for the window and door frames. My method involves making a short pair of strips with 45-degree cuts to use as a template. Hold them at the corner of the frame where you want your architrave and mark the wall at each corner. You can then use those marks to get the length of your architrave pieces. I find that I get a reasonably accurate cut doing it this way. To finish the arcs, I like to pop a nail into the side of the mitered pieces to keep them coplanar. The door frame was done using that same method. The workshop was done the same way, trimming the braces, then the window architrave, and around the door frame. I'd be spending most of my time in the workshop area in future, so I put a cover strip over the horizontal join in the dividing wall, even though it was quite straight. I knew there'd be one across the back wall, so I needed them to match in here, otherwise it would drive me crazy. Again, I used some screws through the cover strip to pull the ply sheets flush with each other. While working away, I came up with the idea of using my old man's Airless spray gun to paint the entire garage. Spraying the finish would need a little more prep, but would be so much quicker. Either way though, all the holes needed to be filled and then needed to be sanded back smooth. For that, I used this linseed oil based putty and a 120 grit sandpaper. Any join lines in the wall sheets or trim were filled with this water-based gap filler and then smoothed out with a small paintbrush dipped in water. Since I was spraying, I needed to mask everything that I didn't want covered with paint. This pre-taped plastic film is good for covering larger areas. And here you can see the results of the gapping and filling, which I stopped filming since I just wanted to get it done. Did I mention that I hate painting? I lashed out and bought one of these masking machines to make masking the floor a little bit easier. I ran the paper around the edge of the wall and taped the back edge to the drop sheets. When it was go time, I readied the spray gun and MacGyvered up this solution to prevent overspray getting on the camera, which actually worked pretty well. First coat was a primer that would soak into the bare timber and make a nice base for subsequent coats. I finished just in time for a storm to come over, which my exposure settings couldn't deal with, and there was a mad panic to cover everything that needed covering. This is what it looked like after the primer was laid down. I didn't film the next two coats, except this useless view from the box trailer, but I think you get the gist, don't you? This is how it turned out. It looks alright, but it's just a white garage. Now let's talk workshop. The walls were puttied, sanded and gap filled in record time. Then, well, the way I decided to tackle the paint job meant that it took a lot longer than expected, but it made the painting part significantly easier. First, I took down all the trim from the ceiling. Why, you're probably asking. Well, I plan to leave the foil insulation sheets unpainted and coat the trim pieces black. Keeping the paint off the foil while cutting in the black paint while the trim is up on the ceiling would be ultra tedious. To me, this seemed like the least painful way to get the finish I wanted. I started by priming anything that was bare timber, like the cornice pieces and around the edge of the door, then onto the walls. Spraying the paint on wasn't really an option, so it was back to the old brush and roller. The primer I used was this one from the Hammer Barn, and it seemed okay. Then the dividing wall and the two little walls beside the roller door were treated to 2 more coats of white low sheen acrylic. You may have noticed that I removed the door, and that was to make it easier to paint. In another life, I learned to stand the door up on some scrap pieces of timber and brace it against something to keep it upright. This works better with multiple doors, but in this case I've used a ladder, a clamp and some scrap timber to support the door. It was then given a coat of the wall paint, as an undercoat for its final gloss coat. Then it was time to crack open the black paint and go to town. All the trim pieces got one coat of black on the ground and would receive another coat after being screwed back up to the ceiling. Before that happened though, the back wall was going to cop a coat of black as well. Eventually there'll be some black shelving across the back, and I've sourced some black storage containers that I'm planning to put on those shelves, so I wanted all that to blend in and virtually disappear. Also, I like black and I don't care who knows it. I thought the truss would look better in black too, so I gave it a clean up and slapped on a coat. I thought it would be super tedious, but it turned out to be quite satisfying. The paint went on nicely and dried to a nice smooth finish. I used this Surla Duragard exterior low sheen acrylic from the Wattle paint shop. While I still had it out, I gave the diagonal braces a coat as well. Once everything had a coat of black, it was time to throw all the trim back up. Everything was starting to come together and I was quite happy with how it was looking. As I put up the batten cover strips, I went ahead and filled all the holes and gaps and gave them all a second coat of paint. The cornices and truss were also finished as I went, because I wasn't that keen on moving the ladders and plank back and forth all day. I didn't forget to put up this last piece of trim. But before I knew it, the ceiling was finished. Actually, it took forever. All that was left to be painted black was the final coat on the back wall. Or so I thought. It actually needed 2 more coats to get a decent finish. Did I mention that I hate painting? I'm happy with the result regardless. I noticed after I'd finished that the white primer on the top side of the batten strips was reflecting in the insulation tape. I've come up with a solution and I may get up and fix it at some point, but for now I'm a bit over planks and ladders. I did put a coat of gloss acrylic white on the door in Architraves, but it didn't make for riveting viewing. I do need to mention that the gloss dried on the door before I could come back and tip it off, which made gross lumps in the paint and ruined the finish. I neglected to capture it on film because of its upsetting nature. I had to sandbag the door flat and I ended up spraying it with the spray gun since I still had it. So just beware of that if you're using gloss acrylic. Now on to the next job. Trimming and oiling this timber wall. Stay tuned for that in the next episode. Thanks for watching to the end, I really appreciate it. If you liked the cut of my jib and reckon I deserve a beer for my troubles, check out my PayPal link in the description to make a one-off donation. Also, if you're in the market for some reasonably priced gear for photography and videography, click my affiliate link with Newer and check out their wares. Here's cheers.